Contagious Conversations. And so we're going to continue this idea of just how to have conversations about the gospel. But how many in here love just weird, awkward conversations? Right? When somebody brings something up, you're kind of like, really? And you don't even know how to do it. Or you're the instigator of those, right? And you don't even know you are. Like, you just go, I don't know, every time I say something, nobody else speaks. And that's you, right? Well, so we're going to talk a little bit about that in light of the gospel. Like, for example, sometimes my son, he'll walk up and people are like, oh my gosh, he's getting so big, right? Totally appropriate. But if you say that to her, not going to work out too well. Oh my gosh, honey, you're getting so big. Like, it doesn't work. Right? Just not something you can do. Not something she's like, thank you. I've been trying. McDonald's 7 times a day, and we're going to get there. But it matters, right? Who you say stuff to, how you say it, where you say it actually matters. Same thing. Font matters. One, you'll always be mine. One is, you'll always be mine. Right? Even same words, different font. And then where you say certain stuff, like my bad and, I'm sorry mean the same thing, except at a funeral. So where you say stuff, how you say it, when you say it, to who you say it actually matters. It changes a ton. And too often when we're trying to have contagious conversations, we're trying to tell people about the gospel, this is us, right? We're saying it to the wrong people in the wrong way, with the wrong font, at the wrong place, like all of those things. And we just go, oh, there's too many things to memorize. There's too many things. And so what we want to walk through today is how to be incredibly natural with our conversations and use your personality. And how do you be intentional without being manipulative? Because I think all of us, in a way, feel like we almost get too manipulative sometimes with the gospel. Like we're trying to force it into areas that it shouldn't be forced into. Or we're trying to create it rather than just naturally let it happen. And so we're going to walk through what that looks like. So turn with me to Colossians 4. So Colossians, about halfway through the New Testament. You're going to have Colossians 4. Paul is writing to this church, and he begins to, at the end of the letter, tell them just some things that are important to do. Colossians 4:2 says this, continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. So one of the important things to see here in that opening verse 2 is what is God's role and what is our role. Like, I think if we understand God's role and our role, it's going to clarify so much here. So the very first thing, continue steadfastly in prayer. This absolute necessity to add prayer back into your evangelistic mindset. Like, it's not just go out and do a project. It's actually add prayer back in, where prayer is actually what's leading who you talk to, what you say, how you say it, all of those things. And continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. Verse 3, at the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word. So what is God's role? To open the door. What is not your role? To force the door open, right? And I think I'm guilty of that because I get really excited. I want to go save a bunch of people. So I start forcing that door open. And I start pushing it. I start creating it. I start making conversations that shouldn't happen. And it ends up being awkward and weird. And so I step in and I begin to force doors open when I shouldn't. I went and played golf with these guys. 2 of them were friends of mine. We met up with one guy, and we start playing. And the whole round of golf, right, all 9 hours, we're not real good. And so as we're playing, we're continually there's jokes, and there's honestly 4 guys hanging out, inappropriate jokes, this and that, and the entire thing. 18th hole, all of us putt in. well over par. And after we're in the hole, one of the guys picks up the ball, looks at him and goes, hey, I know we've been joking a lot, but, I just have to ask you before we jump in, if you were to die today, where would you head? And he's like trying to figure, is right now the time for, I don't know what just happened. We had 9 hours to talk about it, and you tried to put it in right there at the end. And so it's amazing how often we try to force this. And I think we've all witnessed this. We've all been victims of this. And honestly, we've all been guilty of this, right? So how do we fight that? How do we understand what is God's role where He begins to open the doors, He begins to allow, and how do we sense that and see it and know that? The second thing, what's it say in verse 4? So we'll go back to verse 3. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison. Verse 4, that I may make it clear. So what is our role? To make it clear. So God's role is to open the door, and then our role is to actually make it make sense. Our role is to actually make the gospel make sense, to actually say it in a way, which is how I ought to speak. So let's just talk about some ways that we do this that doesn't make it clear, right? What are some things that we do that doesn't? First off, I think we actually don't know the gospel. Therefore, we don't know how to say it. We know it in churchy terms. We know it as in, well, I went forward on September 6, 1986. I went and I accepted Jesus into my heart. I went and we know all the churchy language. We actually don't know that I was just a mess. I didn't have an identity. I didn't have who I was. Jesus came in and literally took my guilt, my shame, my identity. He took it away. What does even that mean? Can you understand what He did with it and what He put back into you and what He instilled in you and said you are? I mean, do you know that? If you don't, then clearly it's going to be confusing for everyone else. And so all we're trying to do is get them to recite our language, and then they're in. And so if we don't even know the truth of the gospel, if we haven't even made the gospel clear on what Jesus did, if we don't know the story in its purest sense, then of course it's not going to be clear to them. The second thing that we do that makes it unclear is we try to rush through it and just close the deal, right? You just want that prayer said. If we can get the prayer said, then we win. And so we're just rushing through it. And so we don't really care about the middle. We just need that end prayer so we can just move forward instead of slowing down. The third thing is, like we kind of said in some of those funny things earlier, we say it out of place, right? You go up to somebody who just lost a loved one and you go, well, I just, God works together all things to good. And you start talking like not knowing, and they're going, what? And trying to work it out and push it and force it into situations that it shouldn't be forced into. And so we say it out of place. The fourth thing is we try to tell a list of facts instead of a story. Michael talked about this last week, right? We've boiled the gospel down to this list of facts that Jesus, that God made everything, and then Jesus came and made everything better, and then we had sin, and then it all got fixed, and then, right, we kind of make this list of facts that if you can just say them, then you got it, rather than a story of God who in all of who He was perfect and amazing. And out of His infinite love and affection, He created humans and He created the world, and then He gave them free will and ability and desire and mental ability and decision making, and He instilled all of this into them. And in an incredibly wonderful way allowed them to reflect back and to love Him back. And what they ended up doing is taking that and rebelling and going, man, I actually want to be more like you and be more like God than I do want to be who I am, which is all of our struggle, right? We want to be somebody else rather than who we're designed to be. And so in this struggle with wanting to not be us and be somebody else instead of being who He designed us to be, this battle took place where we, in a way, waged war on how God designed us. And God said, you can't try to be outside of who you are. And so the fall happened. And there was a separation because if we can't be like God, then we separate from God. because we want this battle. And God still, in his desire for us, ran after us and made himself into us through Jesus, who not only just came and saved us, but actually lived and showed us how to live and showed us what it looked like to weep and to cry and to have friends and to have family and to be stabbed in the back and to all of those things, and then ultimately died and showed death can't win and resurrected and brought us with him. And he's coming back to say, you know what, all of that was true, all of that was real, and I'm going to make all things new. And so that's the story that we're caught up in. But too often, it's just a list of facts about somebody rather than a bigger story that we're in. And when we just know a list of facts about somebody, it doesn't do anything, right? Hopefully, your marriage is more of a story than it is a list of facts. We just went through this. We're working on our Christmas card, and it was like, what's our bigger story, not just the list of facts? And so you can actually take the story of what happened this year and start doing it like a year in numbers and stuff like that. But if all you have is a year in numbers, you don't have a marriage, you don't have a family, you don't have a life. It's a story that God's pushing into. The other thing is we use church language that makes it unclear. How about some of these phrases? I'm going to ask you to think on some of these phrases just a little bit. I want to talk to you about your salvation. What? Second one, have you been saved from your sins? You just talk to somebody about, they're like, I don't know, where are they at? Like, are they coming back? Or what? How do I save myself from them? The third one, it's one of my favorite ones. Have you asked Jesus into your heart? What? I mean, like, he just goes in there? Like, I mean, that's kind of this wording. We're going, Jesus is a physical man who lived, died, and resurrected, and he needs to go into your heart. I'm lost. I'm trying to figure out how this is going to happen. The fourth one, and we laughed about this, is because in our disciple-making team where we talk about this, the phrase like, hey, I just want you to fall in love with Jesus. I'm going to have to talk to my wife about that. I'll get back with you. There's a conflict of interest, but we'll look into this. We'll look into what's going to happen here, and we'll get back with you. I just wanted to sign off on it. And so, but these are the phrasings that we use, and we wonder why people don't know what we're talking about. And we've confused the gospel so much. But here's why it's important. Back in verse 4, that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. Jesus has entrusted the gospel to us to make it clear. Like, this is the hard work of making the gospel clear, that we do this to see this happen. Like, we have to own this and run after this and work hard at it to make this happen. Verse 5. It continues on. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. So continue on this idea that we're trying to make contagious conversations in a very natural way. The first thing is understanding God's role. He's going to open up the doors. Our role, we're going to just start making the gospel clear. So how do we know when a door's open, and how do we make the gospel clear? Here's the way. In verse 5, it begins to just walk this out. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders. First off, you have to be walking in life with unbelievers. Right? This is just part of it. Now, it's not go find them. It's not project-based, right? It's not like, I'm going to find this one. Where are they at? They at Starbucks today? They at the bar today? They at the games today? Like, we're going to find them. This is your everyday, normal life. You're just walking with outsiders. Part of the Christian life is that you're actually walking with unbelievers. This isn't a project type of an idea. And I don't know how to understand that better, to go, we need to move more to a people-centered lifestyle rather than a project evangelism-centered lifestyle. That's really different. Project means we're always in Christian circles, we're always in this, and then we hear this message that we got to go reach outsiders. So we go, okay, let's go. And we get a group of people, and we're going to find them. People-based is they're in my world, they're in my life, they're in my circles of influence. And the beauty that you then begin to walk with them. If you're walking with them, you'll realize how much easier this is more than anything else. The second thing is that walking your daily life, if the gospel that you're preaching doesn't match the words that you're telling them, it's going to fall apart. I had a friend that would always talk about how much he trusted Jesus. He trusted Jesus. He was sharing Jesus all the time at his work. He was sharing with anybody and everybody that he knew. He was always talking about, man, you just got to trust Jesus. And somebody lost their wife, and he's like, you just got to trust Jesus. And they didn't know Jesus, And then somebody else lost a child. You got to trust Jesus. Somebody else was going through cancer. You got to trust Jesus. And we're all on board with that. And then they do massive layoffs, and he loses his job, and he just goes crazy. All of a sudden now, this gospel that you preached for a long time now doesn't match this gospel that you now have to live in. And so what's it look like to walk out that life, walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of time? Let me just say this. God will use your lifestyle to open doors. Satan will use your lifestyle sometimes to close the doors. And so it's this tension of going back and forth between the two. Verse 6. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. I'm going to read that again. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. This needs to be speech that's winsome and interesting and gravitating, and you just want to be a part of it. So I just finished my second season of U6 soccer coaching for Grayson and whatever we call that. And so here, the third game of the season, I'm out there and I'm like, go, get back. Why aren't they doing anything I say? I'm like, just go. This was me coaching, and I'm watching this other coach, and it's like Phil Jackson out there, working, guys, go over here, go. And they're doing it, and they're moving, and they're actually listening to their coach. And I'm like, so during timeouts and breaks, I'm listening to what he's telling them. I'm like, guys, y'all sit on the bench. I'm learning. And so I go listen to him. Here's what the guy's saying. He's talking to a bunch of 5-year-olds. I'm thinking he's going to have this amazing strategy and this amazing idea of how he talks about soccer. He goes to each kid, and he's like, hey, what's your favorite superhero? He's like, Captain America. He goes, go out on that field and be Captain America. And the kid's like, yes, and runs out. So what do? Yeah. And so I'm over there, I'm like, what's your favorite superhero? I don't know any superheroes, so I'm like, okay, is that one? Yeah. Go be that person. And then we're going through. And I started realizing he inspired his team by just talking life into him, and he was winsome, and the kids wanted to play for him, and they wanted to engage him. It didn't matter how accurate he was to soccer brilliance, right? He didn't have to be. He just had to speak life into the kids. He just had to be gracious with the kids. He just had to go, and he was the biggest one. When our team scored, he would have his team give our team high fives. The competitive nature of me, I'm like, don't do that. Get back on defense. What are you doing? We're losing, And so, but all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to be a part of this. And so we started instilling it in our kids, and then our kids and then we had parents coming over going, thank you for what you're building into our kids and what you're creating with this. And then we had other teams that we played start going, this is amazing. You high five our team when they score. And now I was like, well, we don't score that way. And so it was kind of like, our kids want a high five and we're not scoring. And so it's kind of this whole idea of how do you build that in? And there's just something about being that person. When you talk, it's full of grace. People want to be around you. You speak life into people. I love this idea. I was reading in Acts 17 when Paul goes in and he's talking at the Areopagus. And one of the things that he does is he goes after their questions. He doesn't go after their sin. He begins to speak life into their questions and the things that they're trying to figure out. And he's incredibly winsome, and his speech is incredibly gracious. If you want to open doors, if you want to see the gospel begin, you want to see God begin to open doors, begin to have speech that is unbelievably gracious. That you become the guy that people just go, and the woman and the kids that just begin to go, God, I love talking to that person. When I live, they speak life into me. This is unbelievably powerful to do. And I'll just be honest, unbelievably hard to do often and consistent. Our bent is negativity. Our bent is to try to change people. instead of speak life into where they are. I love this concept of what it looks like to let your speech sometimes be gracious. Like that's the verse I love, right? Let your speech, when you feel like it, be gracious. When they deserve it, be gracious. No, always. So I broke that down in the Greek, and what it means is always be gracious. Just continually, always be gracious. The second thing, seasoned with salt. Don't let your gospel that you talk about be boring. Seasoned with salt, where people are drawn to it, where people want more of it, where people are going, gosh, I need to hear more of what you're talking about. Seasoned with salt means that it's actually intriguing to me. I think a lot of times that we just try to check it off rather than actually share the gospel in a way that's riveting and pulls us in and completely transformative of what this looks like. I think a lot of times we can tell, well, is your gospel boring by you're just trying to get through it rather than actually knowing. This goes back to what we talked about. Do you actually believe your own gospel story? Do you actually believe that you didn't have a chance and that Jesus stepped in and saved you out of your own mess, out of your own religion, out of your own ability, out of your own thought process, whatever it was? He actually stepped in, saved you out of that, and redeemed you out of that, and has now placed you in a place far beyond anything you've ever imagined. Or do you kind of think, well, I kind of did some good decision making along the way. I made really good decisions, which has led to my salvation. If you believe you made some really good decisions that led to no wonder it doesn't really grab to a lot of people. Rather than in the middle of your religion, in the middle of your church life, in the middle of your perfectness, in the middle of whatever, God still came in and saved you and redeemed you out of that and pulled you and put you in an incredible place. When that's your story, it's amazing how much it changes. It's amazing how much that becomes something that people want to hear. Intentional, not manipulative. And so how do you have these natural conversations? So we're going to go now into just some natural conversations that I would encourage that what's it look like to walk this out? If you've been a part of any of my trainings, this is part of it. But these natural conversations of what it looks like to walk in and just have these. So the beauty of them is that these kind of go down in an order where it's easy to have these. The first one is a casual conversation. The beauty of this is anybody knows how to have a casual conversation, right? Hey, did y'all see any of the college football games yesterday? I just had a casual conversation with you. I won. It's so easy to have casual conversation. Hey, it got cold today. Easy. And here's the beauty of casual conversation. Nobody gets offended. Nobody gets offended, right? Like you watching the Cowboy game, how dare you talk to me? Nobody gets offended by casual conversation. Everybody's okay with it. Everybody's okay. So how do you have conversations that everybody's okay with, that they're drawn in, that begin? And then we realize that people begin to let you in a little bit deeper and you begin to have meaningful conversations. You begin to have meaningful conversations about maybe your life, your job, your family. It may be about your finances. It may be about celebrations like an award you just won or a promotion you just got. Things that are a little bit deeper and they begin to let you in. Realize that a lot of us start with, hey, how are you? Let's talk into your eternity. Right? And we wonder, I wonder why they didn't listen. That was weird. I thought we were going somewhere. Try the same thing. So if you think that works, try the same thing if you're not married. On a date, right? Go, hey, how are you? I'm Caleb. You think we could get married? How does your future forever look? You think I'm one of those guys? Immediately they're like, could we just go on a date? At least one. And so we usually jump too far instead of allow people to walk us through normal conversations. And the beauty of this is if you want to look at the gospel narratives, Jesus does this. When he walks in John 4 with the woman at the well, if he walks with how he talked to Zacchaeus, if you look at any of these, Jesus walks through these stories. So casual conversations, anything, and then it emerges into a meaningful conversation where you begin to have conversations that are a little bit deeper, a little bit more purposeful, a little bit more understanding, and then it moves into a spiritual conversation. Spiritual conversation where you begin to talk about purpose, identity, kind of, morality. What about life? What about mortality? Who is Jesus? Any of those things get caught into this spiritual ideas of how do you talk with people? When you realize that we get to walk people through this and have normal, natural conversations, people will begin to lead into this, and you'll begin to see God open so many doors, and then your concept, your ability, your gifting of making them natural and making them normal and what God calls you to make them clear becomes so much easier. Because here's one of the things I love in this verse. Verse 6, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. You love that it's not this uniformed, present-wrapped gospel that can go to anyone, just how it is, how you ought to answer each person. Understanding each person's going to come through this in their way where you begin to hear, what questions do you have spiritually? Who are you spiritually? What baggage do you come with? Are you post-church, meaning that you grew up in church and then you ran away because you have some baggage there? Have you never heard of Jesus before? There's actually a friend of mine that just talked about that there was an 18-year-old white dude in Lubbock, Texas, that came through his church, and they started talking about Jesus, and he goes, who's Jesus? And he was like, whoa, you're in Lubbock. Like, everybody knows Jesus. It's on a billboard. Just look around, kind of a thing. And so, what's this mean? This whole concept, where are you? What's your spiritual journey? What are your questions? Why are you struggling? Too often, we wrap everybody into the same gospel problem and then try to answer it in the same uniform way and wonder why we're not doing this, or we answer each person how we ought. What does it look like to begin to speak life? And then the last one's gospel discovery. That's a big word. We'll do a little training later. But this whole idea of what's it look like to lead people in discovering the gospel for themselves, where they begin to own it and see who Jesus is in an unbelievable way. Not a prescripted, write down, just agree to this list of facts about a person and then let's pray. But this idea that you lead them in a journey where they begin to see God in an unbelievable, kind of amazing way. Not too long ago, a few years back, I walk into a Starbucks, and which is weird. My wife always makes fun of me because I don't even drink coffee. But I walk into a Starbucks, and I felt God say, go talk to this couple. And if you know me, I'm fine talking like this, but I don't want to talk to people other than that. But I walk in, and I use the word, I'm an outgoing extrovert, which means I'll talk to you, I just don't want to. And so I walk out there, and I feel like God's saying, talk to this couple. I'm like, I don't want to. And God just kept on pressing it, talk to this couple, just talk to them. So I kind of, in my manipulative, unbelievably, what I think amazing way, went up and ordered my drink and thought, they've got like a minute, so there's a time limit here, right? I order my drink and walk over there, and I just said, hey, seen you guys over here kind of, flirting, hanging out and talking. It's encouraging to see two young people having an early morning date and talking and doing life together. Like, oh, thank you. And they said, Caleb, your drink's ready. I'm like, that worked perfect. And so I walk away. For kind of introvert people, have an out. And so I walk over there, get the drink. I sat down. I start working. Not too long after that, they come up and they said, hey, we feel like we lied to you. And I'm like, okay, go on. I'm intrigued now. And they're like, well, so we've been married for about 3 years, but we've been separated for about 3 months. And we've been going to a counselor, and the counselor said that one of the things we need to do is do things. So I don't know what kind of whacked out counselor this is, by the way, but it said you need to do things you both don't really enjoy, but you can do together. And I was kind of like, so I'm waiting for that book to be published. But this whole concept, because my wife and I are going to try it. We're going to the ballet and fishing and all kinds of stuff we hate, and so for our marriage, but. One of the things is they came over and they started talking to me. They said, we've been struggling, separated for about 3 months, and this is kind of this first date. And I go, well, how's it going? And they said, well, so we both hate early mornings, and we both hate coffee. And so we got here when it opened at 6 a.m., and we've both been drinking a Trenta black coffee with nothing in it. And I said, so is it working? And she actually said, yeah, just a minute ago, he said, hey, I think this is working. I hate the coffee more than you right now. And so But you can see they start opening up into this meaningful kind of, and so I just threw two things out there. I said, here's the thing. I said, how many were at your wedding? And they said there were about 250. And I said, so you realize that your marriage was a bigger story than just y'all two? And I said, I even think it's a bigger story than that. And I also believe that if you just keep pursuing each other, then the pursuit of one another is going to actually be what the goal is here. And they went, what? And so I said, why don't you sit down? We started having spiritual conversations about the bigness of God inside of marriage and just the pursuit of what a husband and wife, how it resembles the gospel in this pursuit. And then I left. So I actually, again, needed a reason out because that had been enough talking. And so I just said, tell you what, and I entrusted them to go on this gospel discovery. I said, hey, here's a verse. If you want to read this and ask these three questions, what's it say about God, what's it say about man, and what would it change in your life if it was true? And then I left and I gave them my card. And still to this day, they're continuing to meet. And they actually have 3 or 4 other couples that are meeting and having gospel discovery as they go through this journey. I've never been in their group. In fact, we email and that's it. And so it's a beautiful thing when you let them run with it and when you let God open the doors. And your job is just to make the gospel clear, not to try to force it in. Do you think it would have worked if I said, God's telling me to go talk to that couple, and I went, hey, I need to share the gospel with you. I know y'all are over here, sorry. But Jesus came, lived, died, resurrected. He's coming back for you. Do you want him in your heart, your Savior? Do you want to fall in love with him today? Like, it just wouldn't work, right? But walking them through this journey where you're allowing natural conversations is a beautiful thing in which we're seeing the gospel do radical, unbelievable things. And it all falls into doing this. I'm going to read these verses again. Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. So what is God's role? To open the door. Our role? Make it clear. Let's pray.